Chapter 9 Sanditon by Jane Austen. One day, soon after Charlotte's arrival at Sanditon, she had the pleasure of seeing, just as she ascended from the sands to the terrace, a gentleman's carriage with post horses standing at the door of the hotel. As very lately arrived, and by the quantity of luggage taking off, bringing, it might be hoped, some respectable family determined on a long residence. Delighted to have such good news for Mr. and Mrs. Parker, who had both gone some time before, she proceeded for Trafalgar House with as much alacrity as could remain, after having been contending for the last 2 hours with a very fine wind blowing directly on shore. But she had not reached the little lawn when she saw a lady walking nimbly behind her at no great distance, and convinced that it could be no acquaintance of her own, she resolved to hurry on and get into the house, if possible, before her. But the stranger's pace did not allow this to be accomplished. Charlotte was on the steps and had rung, but the door was not open when the other crossed the lawn, and when the servant appeared, they were just equally ready for entering the house. The ease of the lady, her "How do you do, Morgan?" and Morgan's looks on seeing her were a moment's astonishment, but another moment brought Mr. Parker into the hall to welcome the sister he had seen from the drawing-room, and she was soon introduced to Miss Diana Parker. There was a great deal of surprise, but still more pleasure in seeing her. Nothing could be kinder than her reception from both husband and wife. How did she come, and with whom? And they were so glad to find her equal to the journey, and that she was to belong to them was a thing of course. Miss Diana Parker was about 34, of middling height and slender, delicate-looking rather than sickly, with an agreeable face and a very animated eye. Her manners resembling her brother's in their ease and frankness, though with more decision and less mildness in her tone. She began an account of herself without delay, thanking them for their invitation, but that was quite out of the question, for they were all 3 come and meant to get into lodgings and make some stay. All 3 come? What, Susan and Arthur? Susan able to come too? This was better and better. Yes, we are actually all come, quite unavoidable, nothing else to be done, and you shall hear all about it. But, my dear Mary, send for the children, I long to see them. And how was Susan borne the journey? And how is Arthur? And why do we not see him here with you? Susan has borne it wonderfully. She had not a wink of sleep either the night before we set out, or last night at Chichester, and this is not so common with her as with me. I have had 1,000 fears for her, but she had kept up wonderfully, had no hysterics of consequence till we came within sight of poor old Sanditon, and the attack was not very violent, nearly over by the time we reached your hotel, so that we got her out of the carriage extremely well, with only Mr. Woodcock's assistance. And when I left her, she was directing the disposal of the luggage and helping old Sam uncord the trunks. She desired her best love, with 1,000 regrets at being so poor a creature that she could not come with me. And as for poor Arthur, he would not have been unwilling himself, but there is so much wind that I did not think he could safely venture, for I am sure there is lumbago hanging about him. And so I helped him on with his greatcoat and sent him off to the terrace to take us lodgings. Miss Hayward must have seen our carriage standing at the hotel. I knew Miss Hayward the moment I saw her before me on the down. My dear Tom, I am so glad to see you walk so well. Let me feel your ankle. That's right, all right and clean. The play of your sinews are very little affected, barely perceptible. Well now, for the explanation of my being here. I told you in my letter of the 2 considerable families I was hoping to secure for you, the West Indians and the seminary. Here Mr. Parker drew his chair still nearer to his sister, and took her hand again most affectionately as he answered, "Yes, yes, how active and how kind you have been. The West Indians," she continued, "whom I look upon as the most desirable of the two, as the best of the good, proved to be a Mrs. Griffiths and her family. I know them only through others. You must have heard me mention Miss Caper, the particular friend of my very particular friend Fanny Noyce. Now, Miss Caper is extremely intimate with Mrs. Darling, who is on terms of constant correspondence with Mrs. Griffiths herself. Only a short chain, you see, between us, and not a link wanting. Mrs. Griffiths meant to go to the sea for her young people's benefit, had fixed on the coast of Sussex, but was undecided as to the where, wanted something private, and wrote to ask the opinion of her friend Mrs. Darling. Miss Caper happened to be staying with Mr. Darling when Mrs. Griffiths' letter arrived, and was consulted on the question. She wrote the same day to Fanny Noyce and mentioned it to her, and Fanny, all alive for us, instantly took up her pen and forwarded the circumstance to me, except as to names, which had but lately transpired. There was but one thing for me to do. I answered Fanny's letter by the same post and pressed for the recommendation of Sanditon. Fanny had feared your having no house large enough to receive such a family. But I seem to be spinning out my story to an endless length. You see how it was all managed. I had the pleasure of hearing soon afterwards, by the same simple link of connection, that Sanditon had been recommended by Mrs. Darling, and that the West Indians were very much disposed to go thither. This was the state of the case when I wrote to you. But 2 days ago, yes, the day before yesterday, I heard again from Fanny Noyce saying that she had heard from Miss Caper, who by a letter from Mrs. Darling understood that Mrs. Griffiths has expressed herself in a letter to Mrs. Darling more doubtingly on the subject of Sanditon. Am I clear? I would be anything rather than not clear. Oh, perfectly, perfectly well. The reason for this hesitation was her having no connections in the place, and no means of asserting that she should have good accommodations on arriving there. And she was particularly careful and scrupulous on all those matters more on account of a certain Miss Lamb, a young lady, probably a niece, under her care, than on her own account for her daughters. Miss Lamb had an immense fortune, richer than all the rest, and very delicate health. One sees clearly enough by all this the sort of woman Mrs. Griffiths must be, as helpless and indolent as wealth and a hot climate are apt to make us, but we are not all born to equal energy. What was to be done? I had a few moments' indecision whether to offer to write to you or to Mrs. Whitby to secure them a house, but neither pleased me. I hate to employ others when I am equal to myself, and my conscience told me that this was an occasion which called for me. Here was a family of helpless invalids whom I might essentially serve. I sounded Susan. The same thought had occurred to her. Arthur made no difficulties. Our plan was arranged immediately. We were off yesterday morning at 6, left Chichester at the same hour today, and here we are. To be continued on the next video.